Hello friends, I am Dr. Madhavi Kevle, MBBS MD Anatomy, and today's topic is the tongue. In the tongue, the student must be able to answer the following after the attending this lecture. So you should be able to describe the anatomy of the tongue, the blood supply, the nerve supply, lymphatic drainage, and the actions of the extrinsic and intrinsic muscles of the tongue. The tongue is a solid conical mobile muscular organ which is covered by mucous membrane. It partly lies in the oral cavity and partly in the oropharynx. So now that we already know that it is conical in shape, and how is this cone? It is broader in the posterior part and it is pointed anteriorly, and from above downwards it is a dorsoventrally flattened. What are the functions of the tongue? It helps in recognition of the taste. It helps in swallowing, that is deglutition. It helps in chewing the food, that is mastication, and it helps in speaking. Also in some facial expressions it will help us. So the parts of the tongue are the tip, the root, and the body. The tip, it is the pointed part which comes in front. Comes in contact with the central incisor teeth, and the root is a fixed part which is attached to the floor of the mouth. This is the only part of the tongue that is attached. It is made up of lower fibers of the genioglossus muscle. This is the tongue in which you see the dorsal surface, and the dorsal surface is having a midline furrow, and this pointed part towards the screen, towards the this pointed part is called the tip of the tongue. So the body of the tongue, it is a muscular part and which lies between the tip and the root, and we already know that it is dorsoventrally flattened. That means when you see it from the lateral aspect you will see that it is flat, but when you see it from above or inferiorly from below, if you see it, and you will see that it is broader towards the root, that is broader posteriorly, and the tip is very pointed. So the dorsal surface, it has got sulcus terminalis, that is a V-shaped sulcus which will divide the dorsal surface into anterior 2/3 part or the oral part, and the posterior 1/3 part, the pharyngeal part. Now in this lateral aspect of the face you can see this the tongue, and this pink structure is the tongue, and it is mostly made from the lower fibers of genioglossus muscle. Now in the next picture you see the tongue and this V-shaped structure that you see here, which is having this double line like structure. This one is the sulcus terminalis, and in front of that, all this towards the pointed tip, this is the uh, oral part of the dorsal surface of the tongue, and these two structures here behind the sulcus terminalis, in the midline, these two structures, these are the this part is the oropharyngeal part of the dorsal surface of the tongue. Tip of the tongue. Now if you see here again, you see a midline gutter like structure. This one is called a median furrow, which extends from the sulcus terminalis up to the tip of the tongue. And we have seen from the picture behind that there was a sulcus terminalis which is a V-shaped sulcus, and on in front of the sulcus, as we will see in the next slide, there are papillae, and every papilla has got a specific place. So in front of this this sulcus, which papillae you see, the big ones, they are called the valid papillae, which were previously called as the circumvalid papillae. So just going through the slides, the pharyngeal part, it contains the lingual tonsil, the two big midline structures that we saw. Now, what is a foramen cecum and what is the importance of this foramen cecum? So the foramen cecum, it is the it lies at the apex of the V-shaped sulcus terminalis, and this is the point of origin of median thyroid diverticulum, which is also called as the thyroglossal duct in the embryonic life. So this foramen cecum plays its role in the embryology of the thyroid chapter. So let's talk about embryology a little bit. So the tongue is made from two different parts. It is formed from two different parts. The mucosa of the oral two-thirds, it develops from first and second pharyngeal arches, and the mucosa of the pharyngeal part, that is the one-third posterior one-third part, it is derived from the third and fourth pharyngeal arches. So what are the lingual papillae? The lingual papillae are actually the projections of lamina propria of mucous membrane, which is covered with the epithelium. Now, the dorsal surface of tongue, it is covered by which type of epithelium? Now, the dorsal surface of the tongue is covered by non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. So, as we have said that there are four types of papillae. Let's see which ones. There are valid papillae, which are the biggest and the largest, and they are present in front of the sulcus terminalis. Then there are filiform papillae, which are present everywhere on the dorsum. They are small conical and they are responsible for the velvety appearance of the tongue, the dorsum of the tongue. The fungiform papillae are rounded, small pink dot-like structures visible, and they are present at the margins and the apex. And the foliate papilla, they are also present in the front of the sulcus terminalis, but they are rudimentary in humans. They are present in animals and they are functional in animals, but they are present in humans but rudimentary in humans. That means they don't have any function. Now this is the tongue. You see, this part is the pharyngeal part of the tongue. It is present in the oropharynx and it contains the lingual tonsils. These are the lingual tonsils, and this is the sulcus terminalis. In front of the sulcus terminalis, here are the valid papillae, and here are the filiform papillae. Now, this is the median furrow, and this is the tip of the tongue. So, what we see on the inferior surface of the tongue. On the inferior surface of the tongue, we see a median fold of mucous membrane, which is called as frenulum linguae. Yes, it is present from the tip towards the floor of the oral cavity, and we see the deep lingual veins which are present laterally to this frenulum on both the sides, and a fold of mucous membrane which is present more lateral to the lingual vein, and it is called as the plica fimbriata. Now, what do you mean by plica? Plica means the fold of mucous membrane, and fimbriata is the shape. It is wavy in shape, so that's why it's called fimbriata. So here you see the vein, and this one is the this one is the ventral part. These are the veins, and here you see this line going wavy line. This is the plica fimbriata. You can easily see them if you protrude your tongue and see roll your tongue and see inside the mirror. You can see this vein. Actually, there is artery also, but it is not so much visible. Only the vein is visible. So, what are the muscles of the tongue? So, there are again two types of muscles, extrinsic and intrinsic muscles. And as we have seen in the topic of the larynx, the extrinsic muscles, they will connect that specific structure. So in this case, the tongue will be connected to adjacent structures, and intrinsic muscles are those which are present inside the organ itself, and they do not take part in connection of that organ with some other organ. So like in the case of larynx, it was present inside the larynx, but in case of tongue, all the intrinsic muscles will be present inside the muscular this body of the tongue, and they are responsible for the change in shape of the tongue, while the extrinsic muscles, they will only move the tongue, protrude, retract, and do side to side movements. And how many of the muscles are present on each half of the tongue? There are four extrinsic and four intrinsic muscles. So there are two pairs on both the sides of the tongue. So let's see the intrinsic muscles. As I already said, the origin and insertions is not so important for MBBS level, but let's see the intrinsic muscle. So here is the longitudinal muscle. This is superior longitudinal muscle. It goes from the tip till the whole dorsum till the end towards the root. Now this one is the inferior longitudinal muscle. Now there are two more muscles in between, that is the transverse muscle. This is the transverse muscle and this is the verticalis muscle. So let's see their functions. So what are the features of this muscle? That they are not attached, the intrinsic muscles are not attached to the bone. They are attached where then? They are attached to the submucous fibrous layer and to the median fibrous septum. And now let's see the one by one the functions which is important to know. So there are two muscles that will shorten the tongue and which are superior and inferior longitudinal muscles. These will shorten the tongue, and which will elongate the tongue, the transverse muscle, transverse intrinsic muscle of the tongue, that will elongate the tongue. So and the opposite of that is the vertical muscle, which will make the tongue broader and flatten it down. And also, how will the dorsum become concave? The dorsum will become concave because of the action of superior longitudinal muscle, and the dorsum becomes convex because of the action of inferior longitudinal muscle. So opposite actions. Now, what are the intrinsic muscles? What are the names and where do they connect? So the extrinsic muscles are genioglossus, which connects the, so everywhere you will see glossus. So glossus, it is used as a prefix for tongue. Glossus means pertaining to the tongue. So here you will say when see that when the extrinsic muscle genioglossus means it is attaching the tongue with the mandible. Hyoglossus means the attachment of tongue with the hyoid bone. Styloglossus means it is attaching the tongue with the styloid process, and palatoglossus means it is attaching to the palate. So in this picture you can see this part. Here the hyoglossus is cut to see the underneath structures. So this is the hyoglossus. This one is the styloglossus, and you see this part, This one is the genioglossus. You see, this is the mandible. So this is the muscle going to the mandible. This is the genioglossus. Styloglossus will go to the styloid process, and hyoglossus will attach the tongue to the this part of the hyoid bone, the white color structure here. So in this lateral view, you see all the colorful picture, and here you can see this muscle, here this muscle. This one is called as the palatoglossus. So it will connect the tongue. This is the tongue, this is the mandible, and this palatoglossus is going from below. It is attaching the tongue with the palate. So let's summarize the movements. The protrusion of the tongue is the most important movement, and it takes place because of the bilateral action of genioglossus. The retraction takes place because of the styloglossus muscle on both the sides. Depression takes place because of hyoglossus. And elevation is due to palatoglossus. And as we have already discussed, the intrinsic muscles are responsible for the change. The genioglossus is a safety muscle of the tongue, and as we have seen, it helps in the protrusion of the tongue. So what happens if there is the paralysis of genioglossus? The tongue cannot be protruded, right? So why will there be the paralysis of genioglossus? That is, we will see in the lecture on our 12th nerve. But right now, let's understand only the part. If there is paralysis of genioglossus, then what will happen? So the tongue is not being able to protrude out, it will fall back, and where it will fall, behind lies the oropharynx. So when it falls on oropharynx, what will happen? There will be obstruction of the air passage, and which can cause choking of a person, and if not corrected, it will cause the death of the person. So when we anesthetize a patient, we have to make sure that the tongue must be retracted forwards, otherwise the patient will choke, there will be asphyxia and death. So which are the arteries supplying this tongue? So three different arteries are supplying. Some are the branches of lingual artery, which is the chief artery of the tongue, this lingual artery, and two other branches. One is the branch of facial artery, which is called a tonsillar branch, and the artery called as the ascending pharyngeal artery. So three arteries, repeat with me again: lingual artery, tonsillar branch of facial artery, and ascending pharyngeal artery. The venous drainage, as we have seen in the ventral aspect, we can see the deep lingual vein. This is the main vein, principal vein of the tongue, and other veins draining it are the venae comitatus that lie accompany the lingual artery and also the hypoglossal nerve. And all these veins, they will drain into internal jugular vein. So what is the lymphatic drainage? This is important. So lymphatic drainage, the anterior two-third that is in front of the sulcus terminalis, the anterior two-third, it will get drained into submandibular lymph nodes, and the posterior one-third, that is the oropharyngeal part of the tongue, posterior one-third, it will drain into deep cervical lymph nodes. So the motor supply, nerve supply of the tongue is by the hypoglossal nerve, except to the palatoglossus, which is supplied by the cranial part of accessory nerve. And so this accessory nerve has two parts: spinal, accessory nerve. So cranial part is supplying the palatoglossus. The sensory supply is again divided into anterior two-third of the tongue and posterior two-third of the tongue. So in the anterior two-third of the tongue, The general sensations are uh, this lingual nerve is responsible for the general sensations, and special sensations, that is taste. This chordae tympani nerve, this is a branch of the facial nerve. It is responsible. And posterior one third, the glossopharyngeal nerve will carry both general and special sensations of taste. And in the posterior most part, which is called the base of the tongue, internal laryngeal branch of superior laryngeal nerve, it will be carrying the taste sensation. This is the branch from the vagus nerve. Now in this picture we can see on this side motor supply, and on my right hand side this is the sensory supply. So this part in front of this is the sulcus terminalis. So this is anterior 2/3, and this part is the posterior 1/3, and the here you will see the posterior most 1/3 part. So let us see, we have, so palatoglossus is supplied by accessory part, yes, and in the sensory we have different parts, the lingual nerve in front, chordae tympani in front, and glossopharyngeal behind the sulcus terminalis, and the posterior most is supplied by internal laryngeal nerve. Now this is a very important slide. So taste sensation, I'm repeating it. So chordae tympani nerve, which is a branch of facial nerve, it is responsible for taste sensation from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, chorda tympani nerve, and glossopharyngeal nerve takes the taste sensation from the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, whereas internal laryngeal nerve is responsible for taste from the posterior most part of the tongue. So here you see this pink structure, pink oval structure. This is called as the nucleus tractus solitarius. So this is a special sensation nucleus. When we study neurology, you will understand what I mean by nucleus. And right now just understand that this is the nucleus for the taste, and from this arise all the three parts and go to the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, posterior 2/3, and the posterior most. So which are these? As we have seen, chorda tympani, anterior 2/3, then glossopharyngeal nerve, posterior 1/3, and posterior most part taste sensation is by internal laryngeal nerve. So again repeating, this is a very important slide. So thank you very much. If you have any doubts, feel free to ask in the comment section.